There are places in America that look like mistakes, not because they were built badly, but because they were built too big for the world around them. Palaces in the wrong country, castles in the wrong century, dreams made of stone that somehow ended up on a quiet shoreline where they never truly belonged. Boldt Castle is one of those places. It rises from the middle of the St. Lawrence River, perched on a small island surrounded by dark water and slow-moving fog. From a distance, it looks like a European fairy tale that drifted into North America and refused to leave. But Boldt Castle is not a fairy tale. It is a monument to something America has always been obsessed with: wealth, ambition, romance, and the belief that money can build permanence. And then, just as quickly, it becomes a monument to something America tries to ignore: that none of it is permanent. The story begins in the Thousand Islands region, a scattered chain of rocky islands between New York and Canada. In the late 1800s, this area became a private playground for the American elite. It was secluded, beautiful, and just far enough from major cities to feel like escape. The rich didn't come here to be seen. They came here to disappear. During the Gilded Age, America's new millionaires were inventing what wealth looked like. Old Europe had kings and castles. America had industrialists and bankers. And industrialists don't inherit castles. They build them. One of the most powerful men of that era was George C. Boldt. Boldt wasn't famous like a steel tycoon or a railroad king. He didn't need to be. His power lived in an empire that served the powerful: luxury hospitality. He was the man behind the Waldorf Astoria, one of the most legendary hotels in American history. He understood something crucial about the wealthy. They don't just want comfort, they want to feel immortal. And George Boldt wanted to build an object that would outlive him. Not a business, a monument. He purchased Hart Island, a quiet piece of land in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. It was beautiful, isolated, and large enough to hold something absurd. And Boldt's plan was absurd. He wasn't going to build a summer house. He was going to build a castle. A full-scale Rhineland-style palace, complete with towers, grand halls, formal gardens, and a design meant to look as if it had stood for centuries. It would be the largest and most extravagant private home in the entire region. And it would not be built for business. It would be built for love. George Boldt's wife was named Louise. By all accounts, the marriage mattered to him. Not in the performative way wealthy men sometimes use romance as decoration, but in the way someone truly clings to one person as the center of their life. He planned the castle as a gift for her, a stone promise. Construction began around 1900, and it immediately became one of the most ambitious private building projects in America. Hundreds of workers were hired. Materials were shipped across the river. Stone cutters, carpenters, metal workers, an army of labor was assembled to create something that had no practical purpose beyond one sentence: "Look what I built for you." The island transformed. Scaffolding rose, towers took shape, walls climbed upward. The outline of a massive structure emerged against the sky, growing heavier, darker, more permanent with every month. This was not a renovation. This was an invasion of nature by wealth, and it was succeeding. By 1904, Boldt Castle was nearing completion, not finished, but far enough along that its final form was undeniable. It was huge, elegant, ridiculous in the best possible way. The kind of building that makes ordinary people stop and stare because it feels like it shouldn't exist. And then, in one moment, the entire project died. Not slowly, not financially, instantly. Because before the castle could be completed, Louise Boldt died suddenly. And the story of Boldt Castle stopped being a love story and became something darker. A story about what happens when an empire is built around one person, and that person disappears. Louise Boldt did not die slowly. There was no long illness that prepared the world for her absence. No gentle decline that allowed the castle's purpose to soften over time. Her death came suddenly, like a door slamming shut in the middle of a sentence. And when that door shut, the castle lost its meaning instantly. George C. Boldt was a man who understood logistics, systems, and control. He had built a career mastering luxury at the highest level. The Waldorf Astoria wasn't just a hotel. It was a machine designed to make wealthy people feel untouchable. Boldt knew how to manage thousands of moving parts without hesitation. But grief doesn't follow management, and it cannot be negotiated. When Louise died, Boldt did not try to finish the castle in her honor. He did not turn it into a memorial filled with photographs and quiet rooms. He did something colder, more revealing. He stopped everything. On the day he received the news, he reportedly ordered construction to end immediately. Workers were dismissed. Tools were left behind. Materials remained stacked where they stood. Plans were abandoned mid-step, as if the island had been caught in the middle of transforming into something permanent, and then time had simply given up. The castle was not completed. It was frozen. This is what makes Boldt Castle different from other mansions of the rich. Most great houses die the same way wealth dies, slowly, through neglect, taxes, inheritance disputes, and the quiet erosion of relevance. Boldt Castle died at the height of its creation. It wasn't finished enough to become a home. It wasn't unfinished enough to be a ruin. It existed in a suspended state, half dream, half corpse. And George Boldt never returned. He had the money to complete it 10 times over. He had the influence. He had the labor force. He had every resource required to turn the castle into exactly what he planned. But without Louise, the castle was nothing but proof of failure. Not financial failure, emotional failure. A monument that could no longer be delivered to the person it was meant for. So Boldt left Hard Island behind, and by leaving it, he handed the castle over to the only force strong enough to undo billionaires: time. At first, the castle remained quiet, empty towers against the river sky, unlit windows reflecting moonlight, a giant structure waiting for footsteps that would never come. But silence never lasts long in an abandoned place. What begins as emptiness becomes opportunity. The Thousand Islands region had always been a place of visitors. Wealthy families vacationed nearby. Boat traffic passed regularly. People saw the castle every day. A massive, unfinished palace sitting unattended in the middle of the river does not remain untouched forever. Curiosity arrived first, then intrusion. The earliest trespassers didn't come with the goal of destroying anything. They came to explore, to walk through rooms that should have been private, to stand inside a castle that was never meant to belong to them. But the line between curiosity and damage is thin. A door forced open, a window broken, a piece of metal removed as a souvenir. Each small act changes the social permission of the place. It tells the next person, you can do this too. And once a building becomes publicly conquerable, it is only a matter of time before someone arrives not to explore, but to take. Boldt Castle was filled with valuable materials, fine stone, decorative features, metalwork, fixtures. Anything not fully installed yet was easy to remove. Anything installed could be ripped out with enough effort. And the castle had no one to defend it. There were no guards, no staff, no owner willing to fight for a building that, emotionally, had become unusable. So the castle began to be stripped, not in one dramatic night, but steadily, piece by piece, as if the island was being harvested, as if the dream itself was being dismantled and sold off in fragments. Vandals followed. Windows were shattered. Doors were torn down. Wood was burned. The interior, never fully completed, became scarred. Rooms turned into echo chambers filled with debris and rot. The castle's transformation into a ruin had begun. And the most haunting part was this. It wasn't abandoned because Boldt couldn't afford it. It was abandoned because he could. He had enough wealth to walk away from a palace like it was nothing. Enough power to erase an entire project from his life the moment it stopped serving its purpose. Boldt Castle became a monument to the Gilded Age in its purest form. A reminder that when wealth reaches a certain altitude, it stops being practical. It becomes emotional. And when the emotion collapses, the wealth doesn't save the structure. It simply leaves it behind. For decades, Boldt Castle existed in the worst possible state. Not alive, not dead. It stood on Hard Island like an unfinished thought, too large to ignore and too broken to use. From the water, it still looked magnificent. Towers cutting into the sky, stone walls catching pale light, a silhouette that suggested royalty, permanence, and control. But inside, it was hollow. The castle had never been completed, which meant it had never been properly sealed or protected. It had no finished interior that could resist weather, no systems running to fight moisture, no staff maintaining small failures before they became catastrophic. So time entered quickly. Rainwater found gaps, winter froze it into cracks, spring thaw widened them. Wind pushed through open corridors, carrying dampness into spaces that were never meant to be exposed. Decay is not dramatic. It is patient. And on Hard Island, patience had decades to work. Meanwhile, the castle attracted the other kind of force that destroys abandoned places. Humans. Looters came in waves. Some arrived by boat, quietly, at night. Others came openly, as if the castle belonged to the public now. Metal was ripped from walls. Fixtures vanished. Anything decorative or valuable was pried loose. The castle was treated like a warehouse of salvage. And it wasn't just theft. It was vandalism. When people cannot carry something away, they often break it out of resentment. There is a psychology to ruined palaces. They feel offensive to the poor. A giant structure built for luxury, sitting empty while ordinary lives remain hard, becomes a symbol people want to punish. So windows were smashed, stone was chipped, interiors were burned, graffiti spread across walls meant for formal elegance. Rooms meant for celebration became spaces for destruction. Boldt Castle was being eaten, not by a single disaster, but by a slow, repetitive assault. And George Boldt did nothing. He was still alive for years after Louise died. He continued his career. He remained wealthy. But he never returned to finish the castle, never attempted to defend it. The absence was absolute. That absence became part of the castle's identity. It wasn't a property that had been lost. It had been abandoned on purpose, which made the ruin feel colder, more final, a decision rather than an accident. A palace discarded like a failed gift. Eventually, Boldt died too, and the castle outlived him. By then, it had already become something else. Not a home, not even a half-built dream. It was a landmark of waste, a stone carcass in the river, visible to anyone passing through the Thousand Islands. For the public, the story is simplified into one sentence. A millionaire built a castle for his wife. She died, and he walked away. That sentence was powerful enough to keep the castle alive in memory, even as it decayed in reality. It gave the ruin meaning. It framed it as tragedy instead of just abandonment. And tragedy attracts people. Visitors came to see it, to stand at its edges, to take photographs from boats. Over time, the castle became part of the region's identity, a haunted-looking silhouette that tourists talked about, even if they didn't fully know why. But tourism alone doesn't save a building. Without restoration, Boldt Castle would eventually reach a point where even stone couldn't hold itself upright. Rooms would collapse, towers would fail, entire sections would become unsafe, then unreachable, then gone. That future was approaching. The castle was not just decaying, it was becoming dangerous. It took a new kind of owner to change that outcome. Someone who didn't see the castle as a personal monument, but as a public artifact. Someone willing to invest not in luxury, but in repair. And eventually, that owner arrived. Not in the form of another millionaire, but in the form of something more unusual. A government decision. Boldt Castle had survived long enough for the world to change around it. And in that change, the castle's ruin became valuable. Not as real estate, as history. Boldt Castle was saved for a simple reason. It survived long enough to become useful again. By the time serious restoration became possible, the Gilded Age was long dead. The era that produced millionaires building private castles had collapsed into history. America had moved through wars, depressions, booms, and reinventions. The world had changed, and with it, the way people looked at ruins. A century earlier, Boldt Castle would have been seen as unfinished property. Now, it was seen as heritage. In the 1970s, Hart Island and Boldt Castle were acquired by the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority. This wasn't a romantic rescue by a billionaire with a soft heart. It was a practical decision by an organization that understood one thing clearly. People cared about the castle, not because it was functional, because it was symbolic. The restoration work began under a difficult truth. Boldt Castle could not be restored back into what it was meant to be. because what it was meant to be never actually existed. There was no original, finished version to return to. The castle had been abandoned mid-creation, vandalized, stripped, burned, and weathered for decades. The castle's identity was damage. So the mission became different. Not perfect restoration, stabilization, preservation, reconstruction where possible, and above all, safety. Workers cleared debris, reinforced structures, replaced windows, restored staircases, rebuilt sections that had collapsed. Slowly, room by room, the castle returned from the edge of total ruin. From the outside, it began to look alive again. From the inside, the story was more complicated. Every repair carried a choice. How much of the ruin should be erased? How much should remain visible? If you rebuild too perfectly, you create a lie, a castle that pretends it was always whole. If you leave too much damage, you create a monument to neglect that can't be inhabited or used. Boldt Castle was forced to become both, a restored attraction and a scarred ruin. Tourists began to arrive in larger numbers. Boats brought visitors to Hart Island. People walked through halls that once belonged only to the imagination of a grieving man. They looked out from balconies designed for a woman who never saw them. The castle became public. And that was strange, because Boldt Castle was originally built to isolate the wealthy from the world. It was meant to be private, exclusive, unreachable without money and invitation. Now it belonged to everyone. The very thing that made it a symbol of Gilded Age power was inverted. It was no longer an object of personal control. It was a museum of lost control. Visitors came for different reasons. Some came for romance, the castle built for love. Some came for architecture, a fairy tale in America. Some came for tragedy, abandoned forever. But all of them were walking through a contradiction, because Boldt Castle is beautiful, but its beauty is built on absence. It exists because someone had more money than sense, and then lost the only person who gave that money a reason. The castle is not just stone and design. It is a freeze frame of grief at a scale most people can't imagine. Restoration made it usable again, but it could not remove that feeling. Even in repaired rooms, there is a quietness that doesn't match the grandeur. The castle looks like it should echo with life. Music, conversations, footsteps of servants, laughter from distant halls. Instead, it echoes with tourism, with strangers, with people who know the ending before they walk in. And because they know the ending, the castle can never feel like a dream fulfilled. It can only feel like a dream interrupted. In a way, restoration preserved the tragedy more than ruin ever did. Because now people can see how close it came to completion. They can see what it could have been. They can walk through spaces that were almost ready for life. Almost. Boldt Castle survived, but it survived as something different from what George Boldt intended. It survived as a public artifact, repaired enough to stand, polished enough to attract visitors, but still marked by the decades when it belonged to no one. It was reborn, with scars, and in those scars, the true story remained. Not a haunted castle, not a romantic fairy tale, a monument to the moment when wealth stopped mattering. Boldt Castle still stands, That fact alone makes it feel like a victory, a rescue story, a beautiful ruin pulled back from the edge, a reminder that some things can be saved if enough people decide they matter. But Boldt Castle is not truly a story about being saved. It is a story about being left. Because the castle was never abandoned by accident. It was abandoned by choice. Not out of poverty, not out of crisis, but out of a single emotional collapse so complete that even a millionaire's power became irrelevant. George C. Boldt had enough wealth to finish anything. What he didn't have was a reason. That is the heart of the castle's darkness. Most great American mansions died in slow motion. They declined through taxes, inheritance battles, changing neighborhoods, and the quiet erosion of relevance. Boldt Castle was different. It was not drained by economics. It was cut off by grief. In that sense, it is one of the purest monuments the Gilded Age ever produced, because it reveals what that era truly was beneath the chandeliers and marble. A belief that money could manufacture permanence. A belief that stone could outlast loss. Boldt tried to turn love into architecture. He tried to freeze a relationship into towers and halls and gardens. He tried to create a structure that would prove his devotion in a way words never could. But devotion doesn't survive death the way stone survives weather. When Louise died, Boldt didn't lose a partner. He lost the person his entire monument was aimed at. And that broke the logic of the castle instantly. So he walked away. And the castle entered its true life. Decades of emptiness, vandalism, and rot. Not because anyone hated it personally, but because abandoned beauty becomes prey. People steal what they can, break what they can't. Nature does the rest. The castle became a ruin not because it lacked value, but because it had no owner willing to claim it emotionally. Then, almost unbelievably, it survived long enough to be rescued. Not restored into truth, but into function. Today, thousands of people visit Hart Island every year. They take photographs on staircases that were meant for a woman's footsteps. They stand inside halls designed for celebration and feel the weight of a story they already know. The castle has become romantic in the public imagination, a love story. But that framing is incomplete, because Boldt Castle is not a monument to love fulfilled. It is a monument to love interrupted. The castle is beautiful, but its beauty is inseparable from absence. Its towers rise not over a home, but over a question. What happens when someone has everything except the one thing that makes everything meaningful? Boldt Castle answers that question without speaking. It shows the limit of wealth. It shows that money can build almost anything, except permanence, except protection, except immunity from the most basic human truth. People disappear. And when they do, the monuments we build for them become awkward, too large, too expensive, too quiet. Objects that remain even after their purpose has evaporated. That is why Boldt Castle still feels cold, despite its fairy tale shape. Because it is not a fantasy. It is a reminder. A reminder that even the richest man in the room cannot negotiate with death. That grief can stop an empire instantly. That a palace can be rendered pointless by a single phone call, a single message, a single moment of loss. Boldt Castle survived, yes, but it survived as a scar, a public attraction built from private collapse, a beautiful structure that exists not because it achieved its purpose, but because it failed so dramatically that the world couldn't look away. And in that failure, Boldt Castle became something no finished mansion could ever be. Not just architecture, a frozen ending, a monument to the lie that anything is permanent.